Hello, good people. It is Todd Shannon, data scientist, social commentator, getter of buckets, and today we're going to examine the claim that Israel is necessarily evil because they are killing innocent kids. This is probably the most common refrain that I've heard with respect to those who object to Israel's, as they would call it, barbaric practices, absolutely incomprehensible atrocities. Because there's so many innocent kids and just in general, non-combatants being killed in Gaza. And for this reason alone, many people say, regardless of what Israel's objectives are or their quote unquote right to defend themselves, if they're doing that, they're fundamentally wrong and that makes them the bad guy, full stop. But is this true? I want to examine this claim. And in order to do that, we have to reason from what we call first principles. And to illustrate this, I'm going to tell you a story about something that I learned about boiling water some time ago. Did you know that boiling water doesn't require heat? It's very true. See, what's happening when you see water boiling, you see the bubbles, you're actually seeing the separating of the water molecules and those water molecules transferring from a liquid to a gaseous state. Okay? But heat is just one way to do that. Another way to accomplish this is to put the water in a vacuum. In a vacuum, the pressure is so low that the pressure that would normally allow those water molecules to stay together, it can actually separate at a much, much lower temperature, even room temperature for that matter. So therefore, water can essentially boil at room temperature when it's in a vacuum. Most people do not know that space is effectively kind of a big vacuum, and this is why we don't find water in outer space. And when I learned this, it really just caused everything in my thinking to shift because I said, you know what? I really didn't understand what boiling was at all. I thought that it required heat, but it doesn't. It's just one way to do it. And that fundamental shift in my understanding of what boiling actually is a good illustration of what happens when your mind and your thought process is shifted by first principles thinking. It causes you to have a deeper understanding of the problem that you're trying to analyze. First principles thinking is really important, and it's something that is actually kind of difficult to do because it requires that you lay down all your assumptions and all the things you think you know about a subject and really, really get down to the thing that really, really is at issue. Now, with respect to this first principles thinking, when it comes to the Gaza and Israel conflict, now I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. I'm going to ask you to set aside the things that you think you know about the basic morality of kids being killed. Now, I want to set the stage here because I want to just knock out any kind of attacks or some straw men that anyone would try to accuse me of and say, of course, if Israel or the people in the IDF, if they end up indiscriminately killing people and killing people for no reason with no real tactical or strategic objective, then this is wrong. Killing people for no reason is wrong always, okay? So let's just get that off the board. But I think there's a lot of claims that Israel is doing that without a lot of proof that that's what's actually happening. So what I'm talking about specifically is the fact that there is inevitably, as there are in any war, there are collateral damage, or there is collateral damage when you see someone engaging in a war. That's just the way it is. In every war, there's collateral damage. So there are people who are going to be killed or hurt for which there was not really an intent to necessarily hurt them, but they end up being hurt as a result of the campaigns. Another presupposition, and this is an important one, and I grant it, is beyond the scope of this video. But the other thing is that we have to presuppose that the campaign and the war is just in the first place. So those two things we're going to presuppose for the sake of this conversation. Now we want to talk about the morality of quote unquote innocent kids being killed. Does this fundamentally make Israel wrong? Well, let's argue from first principles and let's understand what is the basic foundation of morality in general. Now, ultimately, I just want to put this out there. Ultimately, the source of objective morality is God himself. Without God, there is no objective morality. and we are just arguing about preferences. You prefer one thing, I prefer another. There's nothing that makes you wrong and me right, or vice versa, if there is no God. But I know a lot of people don't accept the religious argument, so we're going to take something that is adjacent to that. And I think there's something that I can assert that is properly basic, and you'll see why in a moment. So just give me some time to build up this argument. And it is my claim that the foundation of societal human morality is the nuclear family. And it's important to understand that it is the nuclear family that is the basic fundamental building block for human morality. Well, you might say, well, why is it the nuclear family and not the individual? And the reason why is because morality is of necessity about how others are affected by your actions. So we can't take it down. We can't take society down to the level of the individual. The individual cannot be the basis of morality, because then morality becomes about the self. And morality is not about the self. Our morality is about others. So we're trying to find the smallest group of people where morality kind of takes its shape. And I'm going to argue it's the nuclear family. Now, there is a theological reason for that, but again, it's beyond the scope of this video, so stay tuned for that. But if we establish the family as the basic block, the basic building block of human morality, then we have a first principle from which we can reason up from. Now, some of you still may not be convinced about this fundamental unit of the family being the basis of morality. Well, I can basically give you an illustration that I think you will agree with that will illustrate why that is necessarily the case. And I will say that if you're a parent, as a parent, you have a different moral obligation to your children than you do to others, to the children of others. I think everyone understands that instinctually and intuitively, and I don't have to explain why it's right. I think I can simply assert that. If you have some food and your child is starving and then someone else's child is starving, you have a moral obligation to feed your child first. Everyone understands this. If your wife or your spouse is in trouble and they need your help, and someone who is not your wife, your spouse, or your child also needs your help, you have an obligation to help your spouse first. Everyone understands this. And that's why the nuclear family is the basis. So it's the spousal and the child-parent relationship that form the basic unit or the basic fundamental building block for human societies. When we reason up from there, this is why we get principles like America First. This is why these things ring true, because we understand that fundamentally what a nation is really just an extension of the human family. It's basically a large number of families that form a larger kind of superset of the individual family groups. For up until recently, until the United States and a lot of these Western principles of democracy, pretty much every family, or every nation, I should say, was ethnically homogenous, and they were quite literally people who were of the same blood. So quite literally, it was just every nation was just an extension, just one big extended family. And everyone understands why, when we say things like America First, why, if we have leaders in America, why leaders in America and the people who lead our nation, why we have obligations to American citizens that we do not have to people who are outside of our nation. And this is why nations pursuing their own interests make perfect sense to us, right? Why? Because they're one big extended family. It means that they have obligations to their people that they do not have to people outside of their people group. This is properly basic. I think everyone can intuitively understand this. So now when we establish that principle, right, then we move into the situation with Israel and Gaza. Now, just one other note I'd like to say to this, because there is a counter position to this. And if we start from, for example, the nuclear family, and we reason up from first principles, and that's the basis of morality, then we can think about globalism as kind of the opposite. It is where we start from the top and then we reason down. Globalism, which is essentially the idea that there are no real nations, we're just one big amorphous blob of humanity, right? And if you start from globalism and then you go down, you try to get down to first principles, then what you end up with is the individual as the basic fundamental unit of human society. And then you have an incoherent system of morality. We do not, human beings are not some big blob, some big amorphous blob of people. There has to be some principle that governs, and in a hierarchical sense, to whom we have our primary moral obligations. And so when we apply this principle, and once we establish that and we agree upon it, now we begin to bring into focus the fundamental moral issue when it comes to Israel and Gaza. The question becomes, if Israel is engaging in campaigns that produce the death and destruction of many innocent people in Gaza, is that necessarily wrong? And the fundamental question that we have to ask there is, does Israel have the same moral obligation to its enemies and to the family of the people in Palestine that they do to their own children? This is a very simple question that you really need to think hard about. Because if you say that they do, if you say that Israel has the same moral obligation to the children in Gaza that it has to Israeli children, then that is not fundamentally different from saying you as a parent have the same obligation to somebody else's child that you have to your own. And I don't see how, in proportion, how it's fundamentally different. It's the same thing. When we start to frame it that way, now we start to ask the question, well, then whose job is it to protect the children in Gaza? Whose job is it to do that? So I want you to participate in a thought experiment for me. If you're still unconvinced, let's propose something. Let's take whatever number of children you think have died in Gaza. Obviously, all of them innocent, because children are innocent by their nature. It doesn't matter what the number is. I think that the numbers have been greatly inflated and exaggerated by Hamas, but I'm going to grant whatever your number is, whatever number you believe it is, let's just grant it. And now I want to ask you this. If you're a parent in particular, would you give one of your children to save the lives of all of those Gazan children who have died? Would you do that? Would you say, I'm going to take one of my kids and I'm going to put them on the altar and my child's going to die, and then that'll bring all the Gazan children back? And the question is, and I really want you to think about this. I'm really curious to think. I'm really curious to understand what you think here. Make sure you put in a comment in the comment section to kind of explain what you would do. Would you give your child to bring back all of those Gazan children? And do you think that would be outside of the scope of your moral obligation as a parent? Because I'm going to tell you what my thought about that is that as a man, my responsibility is to protect my children. That's my job, first and foremost. Once I've done that, then I'll try to help other people's kids. But I do not have the right as a father to sacrifice my children for the children of someone else. My moral obligation lies with my children first as a man. And we don't do the futile and weird counting bodies thing. You say, well, if I give my child, then, tens of thousands of children get their lives back. So I should do that. No, you shouldn't. No, you shouldn't. You cannot say that you have the right to give your child's life, whom it is your job to protect, for the lives of other people. If your child wants to give their life, that's different. But you can't offer it because your job is to protect it. It exposes kind of the futility of counting bodies, doesn't it? So now when we really think about this, now when we really think about how this is unfolding, now let's really take the real reason why there tends to be so many casualties of innocents in Gaza in particular. And that is because, and it doesn't matter what your propaganda say, this is an incontrovertible fact, is that the combatants in Hamas and Gaza, they embed themselves intentionally amongst the people in their land. This is incontrovertibly true. And what they are, in essence, what they're actually doing is they are counting on Israel being pressured to value the life of their children in the same way they value the children of Israel. They are counting on the propaganda and the media and the quote unquote amorphous blob of the global community saying, look at how many of their kids are dying. It's way more than the kids that are dying on your side. Therefore, you're doing it wrong. They're counting on the fallacy of this idea that we are just one big sea of humanity, and Israel should value the lives of the Gazan children the same way they value their own. And the value is maybe the wrong word to use. The real word to use, the better word to use is prioritize, not value, because it's not to say that the children who live in Gaza have different value. They have the same value. We're all made in the image of God. But Israel has to prioritize the lives and the well-being of its own citizens first, because that's its extended family. Now, when you bring this whole thing full circle, then you will understand really just how evil the practice of using innocent children and citizens in your nation as human shields. You'll understand just how evil that actually is, because what they are effectively doing is the opposite of what they should be executing, which is instead of prioritizing the lives of their innocents and the people in their nation, which the leadership in Hamas and the government in Gaza and whoever is calling themselves the people who are stewards of their people group, instead of protecting them, instead of moving them out of harm's way, they are intentionally putting them in harm's way, which is the exact opposite of the moral obligation any person in authority and leadership has. You see, the parents in a household represent the authority, and therefore they have a job to protect and provide for. And so in a society, any government functionally are the sort of the parental guidance of that people group. And it's the job of those people to protect and provide for their people. And instead of doing that, they use their own people as fodder for propaganda and for a war that is, in my opinion, unjust from the very beginning, which is they want to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, and it's not a just war. So even if they were fighting for the right thing, the way they're going about it is wrong, because they have a duty to protect their people first. So I'm curious to know, as we make this argument from first principles, do you think there's something missing from my proposition here? I understand that the emotional issue of children dying is difficult, but I want you to think about it from a principled standpoint. And I want you to tell me what you think in the comments. Am I wrong? Is Israel wrong no matter what? They should basically forfeit and abandon their obligation to subdue their enemies and protect its citizens. If they can't do that without harming innocent people, then they should forfeit that. Is that what you think? Let me know in the comments. And I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. Well, thank you. It's your favorite data scientist, social commentator, getter of buckets, signing off. Until next time, my friends, God bless you.